Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Richard Skipper celebrates the best in entertainment. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. As we wind down 2021, and what a year it has been. And what a year Broadway has been. Ups and downs, closing, controversy about understudies, swings, everything about Broadway. But this show is about celebrating everything that we can find to celebrate in this crazy world. And I do believe that there is a lot to celebrate. And one of the things that I am very excited to celebrate is this wonderful documentary on Broadway by Oren Jacoby, who is waiting in the wings. And I am so excited that he's here. He was supposed to be here several months ago, and unfortunately circumstances precluded that from happening at the time. So we rescheduled. At the time, it seemed like it was far off, but it got here sooner than you would expect. And a lot has happened since then. I'm going to show you the trailer for the film. And on the other side, Oren will be here. And we will talk about everything that's been happening between that time and what's happening right now in the current state of Broadway and the road that led to this film. So enjoy this, and you are going to love this film. Here it is.
When you're approaching Manhattan, you look at it and you think, am I going to conquer it? Will I conquer New York?
New York is a place that when 8 o'clock at night rolls around, the curtain is opening on some of the greatest performers around the world.
It's the most palpable I've ever felt, that connection with an audience.
You have to be present as an artist, and you have to be present as an audience member for the experience to really happen.
Yeah, that's Broadway. Come on, come here. I'm gonna give myself to you, and you're gonna come and love me.
It's a commercial landscape, and every day you have to pay your rent.
It's a business, kid, and everybody's got to pull his own weight.
The theater district in those days, it was so down on its luck.
Help save the Barasco Theater!
When the AIDS tragedy hit, the theater community was particularly hard hit by it.
While Broadway was grieving, this invasion happened.
Broadway began to be priced out of existence.
There's just such a feeling of risk, giving people something they have never seen before.
How come you ain't never liked me?
Who in the hell ever said, I got to like you?
American plays give us back ourselves and empower us to go forward.
We need the voice of the marginalized. Right now is the time.
What's new? What's fresh? What is going to inspire the next kid who thinks, oh my God, I'm going to write a play?
Oren, you are worth celebrating for making this film. So thank you for being here today. And I want to ask you, first of all, what are you celebrating? We've just come through the Christmas weekend. What are you celebrating beyond Christmas, or whatever it is you celebrate?
Well, we're celebrating in our family. My daughter's partner caught COVID right before Christmas, and was quarantined for 10 days, and he's now out of quarantine, and they're back together. And so we're celebrating that we can all be, together now and enjoy the holiday, a little bit of holiday.
Well, it's been a crazy time. It's like this roller coaster ride that we're all on. Everything with Broadway right now. And this film, the message that I get from this film is that there have been so many stops and starts throughout the entire history of Broadway. But right now, what we are dealing with is absolutely unprecedented. But one thing that is not being addressed right now that I'd like to get your take on is the emotional toll that this is taking, not only on the artist on stage, because no one is talking about what this is doing emotionally. You get your adrenaline up. I know as an artist myself, you're sitting in the wings, and then you're told you're not going on tonight. And not only is that happening to artists, but think about those folks who have saved up to come to New York City to see a Broadway show, only to be seated in a theater, only to be told the curtain is not going up tonight. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as you say, it's unprecedented. This never happened before in the history of Broadway. First of all, there was never a period like we experienced from March 2019 till early this September, where Broadway wasn't open at all. I mean, that had never happened before. I mean, for more than a few days at a time, never mind months. And now to be faced with this struggle of trying to reopen, and there keep being setbacks. But I think, the arts reflect our society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just another signal that we all have to work together. We all have to take these precautions. We have to respect the science. We have to try to work together so that we can get through this thing. And it's not easy, and it's certainly not made any easier by a big part of our society not wanting to use common sense and try to take the measures that are going to stop the disease rather than continuing to spread it and allowing it to morph and get worse and worse and take more lives. So I just hope people will get clued in, and the sooner they do, and the sooner we all work together, the sooner everything will come back to normal, including Broadway.
Now, I want to ask you, because you've got this, prolific film career, why a documentary about Broadway?
Well, I'm a longtime theater lover. As you may know, I trained and worked briefly in the theater and have come back to work in the theater occasionally since starting my film career. But so I've always loved it. I grew up in New York. I'm a lifetime New Yorker. And so I was kind of familiar with some of the undercurrents that are in this film. But it really took a chance encounter at a New Year's Day party about 4 or 5 years ago that I met an extraordinary woman, Pat Schoenfeld, who was the widow of Jerry Schoenfeld, the longtime impresario, leader of the Schubert Organization. And she had an idea for a film. She wanted to do a film about this story that people don't know, how Broadway almost went away. And through the efforts of her husband, another extraordinary generation of artists, including directors, actors, designers, as well as producers and theater owners, that near demise of Broadway was averted. And we had consistent growth and artistic renewal year after year from the early 70s through to 2018-19, which was the most successful season in the history of Broadway. More people saw a show and bought tickets than ever before in the history of Broadway. So things were at a real climax when COVID hit and set us back. But so I just thought that was an extraordinary story. And when I heard it and sort of connected the dots, I couldn't resist working with Pat and then bringing together the team that we were able to get to make this film.
Now, we're going to get back to this in just a few moments. And I know that you've done a lot of interviews. And I know that I'm probably the only person who has asked you this question. Before we went live, I asked for a photograph of you as a 5-year-old. And you said you couldn't understand why. I don't think this is you as a 5-year-old, but it is you as a little kid. And there's a reason why I asked for this photograph, because I always like to go back to where it all began before life experiences get layered on you. before you start becoming the person that teachers start telling you who you should be or who you should not be. And here you are, this little boy. Obviously, you haven't changed a bit. I love this photograph. And if you can tell us a little bit about who this little boy is, do you have any recollection of this photograph, when, where you were when this was taken?
Well, I used to go on holidays with my family often to Bermuda, to the island of Bermuda when I was a kid. And that was taken in the front yard of this house that we stayed in Bermuda. And I remember it being this very magical place for me. And we would go there as a family and hang out and go swimming in the ocean. And, you know, just I had great memories growing up and having the chance to go there as a kid. So it's a sense of joy and being outside and those things that, you know, are great things from childhood.
And do you still get a chance to do those things?
Sadly, I haven't been back to Bermuda in many years, but still do try to get outside, try to enjoy the ocean, the seashore when I can. So yeah, part of me still connects to those wonderful pleasures of my early childhood. I can, you know, remember those things.
Now, I want to ask, you are a writer, director, producer, and all of those hats. Which one of those hats do you feel fits the most comfortably on your head? And is there any particular direction that pulled you in first? I know that you went to Brown University. When did it all start for you? And how did you get started on this path?
Well, when I was a sophomore, I guess, in college, my roommate, I had a roommate who was an actor. And so our friendship got me more interested in theater and reading books about the theater and going to plays. And then I started directing plays. And around the same time, this same roommate dragged me down to the Rhode Island School of Design, was in the same city as Brown. And they were offering a course for Brown students to study film production. And he knew I was like a nut who went to a lot of movies. And so he thought he could ride my coattails, would help him get into this class. And instead, what happened was I walked into the room and I liked the vibe coming off the teachers from RISD who were there interviewing kids to be in the course. And I stuck around and ended up becoming a film student and following as I got my Brown degree in literature. I also followed the course of a film major at RISD and learned how to make documentaries and learn how to make films back then, and have just stuck with it, just fell in love with it and kept doing it. And then after a few years later, I continued my theater education. I went to the Yale Drama School and studied directing theater there. So I sort of had both things going and would write and do writing, you know, in between along the way. So that's how sort of both things and wearing both hats sort of started. To go back to your question about writing, directing, and producing, I think, you know, writing is the hardest, producing is the most onerous, and so directing is the most fun. So I probably wear the directing hat easiest. Well, that's where you're working with other people. That's the most engaged in a relationship where you're bringing out the creativity of others and working with others and learning and doing stuff. So I love that part of the process.
Well, I absolutely love the genre of documentary films. And as I said to you earlier, I watched this film when we were originally scheduled to do the interview. And I went back and I watched it today, and there were so many elements that just came flying back at me that I want to specifically talk about today. But I want to talk about the evolution of this film and how it unfolded. First of all, the New Year's Eve party. It's always about getting out of the house and meeting the right people and getting started on this. But meeting those people along the way, let's talk about the team that you start to put together for this film. Were many of those people already in place, or were you meeting those people as you started putting this together?
I mean, one, again, lucky thing that goes back, it was actually New Year's Day, not New Year's Eve. It's a party that I go to many New Year's days with the same a group of people who are often there, and then often they bring guests and you meet new people. But so Pat Schoenfeld, who was the lucky encounter that day, she in her many years working in the Broadway, being married to Jerry, being sort of present throughout his career, had formed relationships with many of the great artists who worked on Broadway and had maintained those friendships over the year. And some of those people have stayed very devoted to her and would do anything for her. And so that was a core of the people we interviewed, were friends of Pat's, people like Helen Mirren and Hugh Jackman, who keep in touch with her all the time and check in on her. Hugh Jackman goes with her to Broadway openings. She's often his date because his wife doesn't love going to the theater. That, you know, they were a group that we started with. But really what the beginning of the process was my going with my colleague, Sam Janician, who's a producer I've worked with on several films. And she and I went to the Lincoln Center Library and started screening in the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Library. They have a collection of videos of almost all Broadway productions have been filmed with at least one little camera in the back of the theater to tape what went on. And we started watching Broadway shows and doing our research and thinking, what are the pillars that are going to hold up this film? And I kind of boiled things down to about a dozen productions that I thought these are the ones that turned the ship. This is where the direction of Broadway, something new happened that changed, and Broadway was never the same after that show opened. And we picked those 12 shows and they said, this has to be the kind of guidelines as we make the film. And amazingly, you know, I look back now several years later, and the film, when it was finished, those same 12 shows stuck it out, and they were the ones that lasted after a lot of scrutiny and editing and putting things in and taking things out. They were the turning points. And I learned something really remarkable in the course of that, which I didn't know when we picked those 12 shows. My prejudice, I was sort of a Broadway, sort of in a way, a kind of a theater snob, that I, you know, had a kind of whatever, you know, great play theory of theater, where I love the great playwrights and the great actors and look down my nose a little bit sometimes at the most popular shows. And I thought the lowest common denominator for Broadway big super hits was that they were things that producers picked because they were easy, because they were things that would appeal to everybody. And only after doing the research and figuring out and looking at what these shows really were, that I learned that actually the opposite was true, that every single one of these blockbuster, game-changing successes was an incredibly risky, almost an experimental piece of theater, that someone had gone way out on a limb as an artist and said, I'm going to do something totally crazy because I believe in it. And that it then gotten producers and Broadway theater owners to invest in that crazy choice. And those were the big successes.
Many times it also has to do with the alchemy and the timing and everything coming together at the same time. Going back, do you recall the very first Broadway show that you saw?
You know, it's funny. You know, my mother, I remember, used to take my sister and I to the theater, and we'd go, you know, when we were very little. And I think the first thing that I remember that was a Broadway show is I remember going to a revival that they had at City Center of Finian's Rainbow. And that was something that I, you know, had a great time and loved doing. I also remember going around the same time, I think, to see A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which was, you know, one of Sondheim's early shows. In terms of plays, I remember seeing some incredible Eugene O'Neill early, you know, in my life, incredible productions of Eugene O'Neill plays with Jason Robards and Colleen Dewhurst doing Moon for the Misbegotten. And that was a very memorable early play that I saw.
Now, there are so many stories that are through lines in your film. Were you aware of many of these instances that were happening when they were happening in New York? For example, the demolition of the theaters to build the Marriott Marquis. Of course, this was newsworthy, but were you really aware of what was going on at the time?
I mean, this is what's sort of interesting is that a lot of, as you say, the individual events or the themes that we touch on were things that did matter to me, that I did know about during my life, but I didn't really understand how they were part of the same story.
Mm-hmm.
They were isolated events, incidents that I remembered, or social things that happened that I'd never before connected them to these other events and saw how they were part of an unfolding drama of how the city and Broadway theater are connected and how they depend on each other and how what happens in the city affects what happens on Broadway and vice versa. That a lot of what makes New York City thrive as a destination for people and as a vital cultural place is dependent upon what the Broadway theater does. And when the Broadway theater goes up, Broadway goes up. And when the Broadway theater goes down, New York goes down. They're very closely connected.
Now,
I do remember the theaters being torn down and having very strong feelings about it. I remember, of course, some of the other stories that we cover. I remember the AIDS crisis. I remember losing friends and how that changed the theater in New York and changed New York. I remember the invasion of British musicals and how that changed Broadway theater. And then, was very aware of the last phases of renovation of 42nd Street
mm-hmm.
and turning things around there and seeing how that made a big difference in the city. And I remember when it was really bad too. I remember walking, that block between 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue along 42nd
Talk about that
Street.
for a moment. I came to New York in 1979, which of course was a very different New York. And I joke about this. I have a one-man show that I talk about coming to New York, and I imagined the New York of breakfast at Tiffany's and barefoot in the park. When I arrived in New York, I landed in the middle of Taxi Driver and Midnight Cowboy. We talk about this. I pulled up a photograph. I just Googled today, Broadway 1979. And this was the first photograph that popped up. Here we are. And this was the area. And I also, that whole area of beyond 42nd Street and how dangerous that whole area was. Some of our listeners, I'm sure they know about it. Some of our younger listeners may not know, but if you can just take us back, let's start at that starting point.
Well, as we explained in the film, the fortunes of New York City had gone through quite a bit of a decline. The city was broke, social services were down, the police department was corrupt and fairly racist, and the organized crime had a real foothold in New York City, particularly in the central Times Square theater district area. They owned a lot of the real estate or controlled a lot of the businesses that rented the real estate. And they had a field day sort of selling vice. And so that meant there were, strip joints, there were, hookers, available for whatever people were looking for. There were drugs. There was
live sex shows.
Yes. There was, rampant muggings and crime on the streets. Some people, there was a thrilling aspect to it. You felt you were tough and you were a survivor if you learned how to handle New York and how to get around and not suffer ill consequences. But it was not for the uninitiated. It was a Wild West kind of atmosphere.
Now, I was one of those actors, a young actor in New York. Even though I grew up on a tobacco farm in South Carolina, I was in the picket line standing between Colleen Dewhurst and Tony Randall with a picket sign saying they cannot tear down these theaters. I love I don't want to give away too much in the film, but Christine Baranski in the film talks about the ghost of these films, of these theaters, and the fact that in these theaters that are being torn down, and the memories. And then I love the fact that you show these moments of those ghosts that existed in those theaters. but you go into detail as to why those theaters were being torn down. I also pulled up a photograph that I found. This is what was happening here. Tommy Tune really captures the feel of what we all were feeling at that moment when that wrecking ball was going through, and the claw, as he said. We were standing there. I think I told you earlier, I was standing on the sidelines watching that happening, and it was gut-wrenching. And but they were trying to clean up that area and try to revitalize the area. And
they had this idea to build this hotel that would bring 3,000 tourists a night to come buy tickets on Broadway, and they thought it was worth it. And I mean, it's interesting. There's a joke, that came out in the film, is that one of the reasons the Schuberts didn't fight so hard to save those theaters is they weren't Schubert theaters, and so they didn't care that much. There was a kind of tribalism in those days. Since then, the theater community, the theater owners have learned to look out for each other and to protect what they have is something that they all benefit from. But back then, they were a little more competitive. And Tommy Tune was rehearsing at the time. He was rehearsing the musical Nine, and he was directing it. And they were in a little rehearsal studio. This was before the New Amsterdam Theater had been renovated by Disney. And there was an old theater that was above what had been the Ziegfeld Follies Theater. Mm-hmm. And it was called I think it was the Ziegfeld Roof. And it was where, after the Ziegfeld Follies show, celebrities and the in crowd would go up to this little theater and see another midnight show. There was this beautiful jewel box of a theater that was still there and had been deserted. And somehow Tommy Tune had gotten the keys, and that was where he was rehearsing his musical. And so these people were actually living kind of among ghosts of another theater that had come and gone. And so they really understood the value of those beautiful theaters that were still there and not wanting to lose 3 more beautiful ones. But it was the whole Broadway community. I mean, what I remember is, at the time, being a young drama student, it's that the theater world came together. Everybody was upset. Everybody cared about it. Everybody understood what those theaters represented. And that was another thing that I learned, again, making this film, is how interviewing all the wonderful actors and directors and playwrights that we talk to, how the theater community carries with them this history and think of it as a sacred thing. Mm-hmm. And it's partly why Broadway continues the way it does, because those artists will make a commitment to come back. And even though they can make more money doing television or movies or something else, they want to come back to Broadway because they see that it represents something very important spiritually in the history of our country and what it means to be an artist. And so that was a wonderful thing to be reminded of, interviewing wonderful actors like Tommy Tune and Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen and all the others that we talked to, Christine Baranski.
But not only was it those theaters, but it was also the Piccadilly Hotel. And when I first came to New York, I was 18 years old, and there was the Ziegfeld Girls, and they used to meet on Wednesday afternoons at the Piccadilly Hotel, and they would have an afternoon tea. And this 18-year-old boy used to go there and have afternoon tea with the Ziegfeld Girls. And I met Winnie Shaw, who introduced the song Lullaby of Broadway in Gold Diggers of 1935. And that was their hangout, and it was gone. And that was why I was out there picketing. And it was just such a sad time. And just as that ends up happening, and that is taken away from us, and that ends up going away, then the AIDS crisis hits New York, and especially hits the theater community. And if you can talk a little bit about that and how that really came through the theater community and took some of our greatest artists with it.
Well, I mean, it was something that if you worked in the theater back then, you knew about AIDS before other people because somebody you knew got it or died of it. And it was you'd hear about it for years. You begin to hear about it, and it was kind of, I think they first, as Tommy Tune said in his interview, they called it gay cancer in an article in the New York Times.
That's right.
Because nobody really understood it or kind of exactly knew about it. But, and there were myths about how it was spread, and nobody in the government was really taking action to do anything about it. I mean, we see this pandemic, even though the government was slow to respond, when the government finally responded, that's what made the difference. We need, for, public health, people have to have support, and the government has to put money and resources into doing something in these terrible crises. And that didn't happen for years with AIDS, because the president then, Reagan, refused to acknowledge it or care about it. And same with the mayors in New York. They didn't do enough. And it was partly because of the stigma of...
Excuse me for interrupting, but interestingly enough, you don't get political in the film at all. You don't go that route. You focus specifically on the theater community. That was a conscious choice, I'm sure, that you made.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we wanted to tell this through the eyes and in the words of the people themselves who experienced it and lived it. And so I had very, detailed questions about these different periods, but the responses were the responses of those people. And so they weren't political, they were very personal, and they were very direct, and they related it to their work. And I thought that was the focus we should have. And I don't mean in your show to suddenly turn a political light on it.
No. I just wanted to, bring that up, because I think it's a very important point to make.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it in human terms, and that's the way I remember experiencing it. It wasn't a political thing. It was just suddenly the theater community was decimated. And as we tell the story in the film, one of the results of that is that there was a generation where the great talents who should have come into the fore and had their great opportunities making theater in the United States were gone. Too many choreographers, too many playwrights, too many actors, too many designers and composers were gone. And a result was a kind of vacuum that ended up being filled for a number of years by musicals and things that came over from Britain, where AIDS hadn't yet hit and didn't have the same impact.
Well, and that brings to the next chapter. And there, of course, was the whole British invasion, with all of these British shows that started coming in they started going. And I love the story of Cats and how that came about, and the whole renovation with the Winter Garden Theater. And all this work that had got into the Winter Garden Theater. And I will be very honest with you, I did not see Cats in its original run. However, I knew Laurie Beachman. And when she passed away, I went to her memorial at the Winter Garden Theater. And I remember walking into the theater going, oh my God, what have they done to this place? And you remember what it looked like. But there was a certain look that they needed for the play. So if you can elaborate on that for a moment.
Well, again, this is one of the things that I love about Broadway is here's this show that people think of as, this crowd pleaser show, Cats. You think about the pitch, the elevator pitch for Cats. If Andrew Lloyd Webber had gotten in the elevator with Jerry Schoenfeld and Bernie Jacobs to tell him about his new show, and he was going to say, okay, well, it's these poems by T.S. Eliot, the most esoteric poet in the English language, that we're going to put to music that I've written that is sort of, I'm trying to sound like Puccini. And the directing is going to be done by Trevor Nunn, but really what he's going to do is he's going to use these techniques that come from the avant-garde of the living theater in New York and the Polish crazy theater of Jerzy Grotowski. And that's going to be, and people are going to be running up and down the aisles and yelling and putting their singing and shouting at the audience members. And that's going to be a Broadway hit, and kids are going to love it. And yet that's what happened with Cats. So, they were willing to take a gamble because it was Andrew Lloyd Webber, and they trusted him, and I guess, as we say in the film, Bernie Jacobs' kids went with him to see it in London, and they loved it. So he thought, well, if the kids like it, maybe it'll be a hit.
And it changed Broadway. It truly changed the face of Broadway. I want to talk again about your process. When did you start working on this film?
I guess it was like the fall of 2018. Or wait, no. Sorry, it was the it was the summer of it was sometime in 2018, early 2018.
And when did you feel that it was completed and it was ready for audiences to be seeing this film? And of course, little did we know that everything was going to shut down.
Hang on a second. Sorry. I have to jog my memory. It was the fall of 2017. We started shooting.
Okay.
We finished in the fall of 2018 is when we opened at the Hamptons Film Festival. In 20 COVID has gotten everything mixed up. Anyway,
it's COVID brain. I've got it myself. I can't remember.
We premiered right before COVID hit at the Hamptons Film Festival, and then COVID shut things down, and so we didn't have our release in theaters until summer of 2021. So we sort of took 2 years to make, and then it was sort of a 2-year, kind of a year and a half hiatus before we were able to release it.
Well, what did your calendar look like when everything shut down?
We were about to be in a bunch of film festivals, some of which didn't happen, and some of which happened virtually. People watch things online. I was, researching a new film, which I just began to dig into, but then nobody was doing anything. And so I didn't know, am I going to be able to make this film? And we had to sort of put that on hold for a number of months. But I continued to research and talk to people and develop the relationships that are making the film possible that I'm working on now.
No, obviously. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just saying it was obviously a time of delay for everybody. We were waiting to see what's going to happen. How are we going to work around this?
Now, obviously, you had no idea that anything like COVID existed when you were making this film. And obviously, because of a film like this, something like COVID, people are looking at this film through different eyes than that they would have ever looked at it if COVID had never existed. It's a great film on its own merits, but now because of COVID, people are looking at it very differently. How has COVID affected you beyond the obvious that we've all gone through artistically, that you think that you will be carrying through out the rest of your artistic career beyond once we're back to quote unquote a normal existence, whatever that means?
To me, the lesson of the film that I think gives encouragement or bodes well for Broadway is that it reminds us that we have to keep reinventing ourselves. That the way Broadway has survived artistically and commercially through the years is it keeps changing. It keeps adapting to what's going on in our world and figuring out how to make a plan, how to do something new that will engage people, that will matter to people. And it keeps doing that. And it's done it over and over again, despite all the upheavals and all the ways our society has changed over the 50 years that we covered in the film. Broadway keeps up, or sometimes leads the way, or sometimes falls behind and then catches up, or sometimes, is at the cutting edge. And as an artist, I think that's a thing we have to remind ourselves, that we have to challenge ourselves. We have to not get lazy and fall into old patterns of work, and we have to, push ourselves to reinvent the wheel, to come up with new ways of doing what we do and finding stories that matter to people now. I remember that was when I was a young director working in the theater. My mentor used to say one thing over and over. He would say, the theater has got to be now. Meaning that even if you were directing a play by Shakespeare or an ancient Greek tragedy, you somehow had to relate it on some very important level to what people were coming into the theater that night. What was it going on in their lives? You had to grab them and say, this is something that matters to you at this moment. It's not some ancient ritual. It's something that is vital to you and to your life. and connect with people on that level. And that's, I think, over and over again as an artist, what you got to do.
Absolutely. Is there anything that surprised you about the machinations of Broadway that you had not really thought about before working on this film?
Well, I must say, I was trepidatious going into this, knowing how difficult it is to bring a camera into a Broadway house. As a filmmaker, I'd learned doing several other films related to the theater that the union costs and the other prohibitions that are there in place, partly because the theaters don't want you to show people what they're doing in a way that people will then not pay the ticket prices to come in to see it on Broadway. They don't want you to be showing it on television or showing it in the theater and giving people a sneak look at something that they want them to come and only see live. And so they make it very hard and they make it expensive. And I knew that was going to be tough, but it turned out to be even tougher than we expected to get a camera into a Broadway theater or even a Broadway rehearsal. We ended up filming rehearsals for the Manhattan Theater Club, which is one of the nonprofit theaters that works on Broadway and does shows and repertory over a season for a subscription audience, as well as for regular Broadway theater owners who show up and buy tickets. But with those theaters, it was slightly easier making an arrangement and getting permission and getting access to come in and film. But it was still a crazy big part of our budget, paying the expenses for having access to that. And I understand why it was, but it was a surprise.
Now, with all of these different changes that have happened throughout the history of Broadway that you cover in the film, do you think that social media today it would have made those different areas more difficult or easier to navigate through? And I'm talking about what we're going through right now, because everybody has an opinion. Everybody's throwing their opinions out there. And a lot of times those opinions are not based on fact. And someone says something. It happened with Charlotte St. Martin just recently, where she said something, whether it came out the right way or the wrong way. She was vilified before she even had a chance to defend herself. And I'm not taking sides. Anyone who's watching this, I'm just saying that everyone's quick to attack and pull someone down, and we live in a cancel culture that I think is very dangerous right now, and that scares me about where we are as a society.
I agree. I mean, you think about the history of our country and many of the periods we've gone through, where if people's prejudices and people's snap judgments had ruled the day in any of these other eras that we show in the film, there could have been much different results. But I mean, sometimes the one good thing, I guess, about social media is that if there's a bad swing, there can quickly be a positive swing. So there was a bunch of negative energy came out after the Charlotte St. Martin comment, but then a day or so later, there was a beautiful moment where an understudy went on in the production of The Music Man, where Sutton Foster.
If I could address that for a second, the understudy was not available to go on. The swing went on, who had not even rehearsed that amazing story.
Yeah.
So just amazing situation. Yes. So unbelievable story.
And it was great because it kind of proved the point that people were making, that those understudies and swings really are talented. And it was great at the curtain call. Hugh Jackman pointed that out for everybody, and that he has so many followers. I think that got wide distribution, that he was giving credit to this extraordinary performance by a young woman who, as you said, not only was, a swing who was covering 5 other parts and had never rehearsed this till that afternoon when someone stuck a book and a script in her hand and said, okay, you're going on tonight, you better learn the role. And she had to come out and do the dances with him and then go on a few hours later and play it to a packed house, and pulled it off, I guess, from judging from the reaction of everybody in that video, which has now gone viral.
Now, have you been... I'm sorry, go ahead.
And we just got to accentuate the positive in these situations. Like, I'm not a big fan of what social media does, but sometimes there's some good things, and we got to applaud those things.
Absolutely. Have you been to the theater since we've been back?
Yes, I went to see Lynn Nottage's play Clyde's. Was the first thing that I've gone to. I've got tickets for some other things, which we'll be going to soon. Hopefully, although, you know, some things are canceling and postponing, but I'm optimistic that we'll be seeing some more shows soon in the new year. But Clyde's by Lynn Nottage was really terrific and fun at Second Stage. She's a terrific playwright.
And now, because of this, again, incredible film, and I encourage everyone to see this, are you looking at, when you go to the theater, are you looking at everything through different eyes now when you go to the theater?
I think I just appreciate it all a little bit more than I did. I, you know, have a sense of, you know, how hard it is, what the odds are that these things making it there, how invested all of the artists who have collaborated have to be in the work that they're doing. I mean, one of the wonderful things that Helen Mirren said in her interview that we weren't quite able to use all of in the film. She describes what a wonderful feeling it is as an actor when you're in your dressing room and you're putting on your makeup, and she's there and she's thinking about all the other artists who at that same moment are coming and getting ready to do their shows. And they're all within about 5 or 6 blocks of each other. And there are thousands of them. There are actors, there are stagehands, there are, you know, the orchestra members, and everybody's coming, getting ready for their show and about to put their energy together to pull these things off at this incredible level of professionalism and also spontaneity and excitement, night after night, show after show. And I think that spirit of, you know, artists dedicated to what they're doing and loving doing it and needing the public to connect with, it's one of the great things in our world, is that people can make that connection across the footlights of a stage. And so I'm very excited to be, you know, on either side. But to be in the audience of a Broadway show is a very special thing.
Was she your first interview for the film? Who was your first interview?
The first interview was Pat Schoenfeld, and the same day we interviewed her, we interviewed, I'm trying to think, there was a Broadway producer, and while we were getting ready to film the producer, we filmed that interview and a bunch of the other interviews in Sardi's. Mm-hmm. And it was a Monday when Sardi's is closed because it's a dark night on Broadway, and so Sardi's is closed that night. But one of the staff members had come in to open the place for us and be there while we were filming, and that was Johnny Filiti, who's one of the head waiters at Sardi's. Yeah. And we started talking while we were setting up the lights to do the interview, and he was basically reading back to me my script. He was telling me these stories based on all these wonderful moments that we wanted to highlight in the film. So I just said to the cameraman, come on, let's do another interview. And we just put up a few lights and we filmed Johnny standing there at his post at Sardi's, bringing to life, you know, his take on the years of Broadway that he'd experienced from that position at a very important post in the Broadway firmament. So that was a good day. Albert Poland was the other producer that we interviewed that day.
Helen Mirren has so many incredible moments that, I mean, all of the interviews are wonderful, but I love her take on so many things that I love when she talks about the old New York, the sleaze element that's no longer there, and the fact the prostitutes and everything. She actually enjoyed that. She's, after all, we're in the theater. Yeah, that element. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. That element, but there was something about that being in New York at that time. It wasn't safe, but you went to the theater, you saw everything around you, but there was a sense of excitement in New York at that time. Did you feel the same thing at that time, or did you feel completely uncomfortable in New York at the time?
No, I as I said earlier, when we talked about that, what it was like in that period, there was some kind of something in the air in New York in the 70s and early 80s. You know, I'd grown up here, and so you'd think you'd be blasé. It's your city, you've been there, you've done that. But there, you know, particularly around show business, you kind of felt there was this electricity. It was like you were in a town where this stuff was going on, and it was sort of fun and exciting, and it was this dangerous stuff around that was part of being in a city. It's like it was scary sometimes, and you had to find your way through it to get to the places that mattered to you. So it was a little bit living life on the edge, and I wouldn't want to go back there. I'm very happy, you know, that my daughter's grown up in a safer city. But there was something special about that time.
It was unique to New York, and it was a magical time. I mean, for me, coming to New York at that time, being an 18-year-old, it was like being in the land of Oz, actually. But we're still here. We're going to wind up, but before we do, I always end my shows with my homage to James Lipton inside the Actors Studio. He always ended with his questions. So I've got some random questions for you, Oren, just for the fun of it. So the first question that I'm going to ask you is, who do you think what was the Holy Grail interview that you were going after when you were working on this film? And when you got that interview, it was like, wow, we got it.
That's a good question. I think, you know, at different points in the production, you have different holy grails. You know, one holy grail that eluded us, sadly, was Stephen Sondheim,
wow.
Who was someone else who Pat had a friendship with, and who knew about the film early on, and said he would be in the film. And then he was busy working on what was to be his last musical, which he never completed. And so he was never able to be interviewed. Lin Manuel Miranda was another exciting figure that we'd hoped to interview, who said he would try to do it. And then he was in making movie after movie after movie, and we couldn't get him on camera. I mean, two of the most special ones were definitely Helen Mirren, because I went into the interview with Helen partly because she was a friend of Pat's. And Pat said, "Oh, you got to interview her." I'd never seen her on Broadway. She'd done several very, you know, well-received Broadway performances, but she wasn't by any means a Broadway stalwart, someone who comes back time after time after time. But she is someone who's come back and clearly loves Broadway. And she's so articulate that even though I didn't have a lot of things to ask her about, she just reeled off story after story after story and wonderful comment after wonderful comment. And the other person like that was Ian McKellen, who's another good friend of Pat's, who I went to London to do him and two other people, and the other two dropped out. So we were down to just Ian McKellen. And again, I went into the interview thinking, well, I'm not sure how much Ian's going to be able to tell us. But a couple of days before, I shared with him kind of just some bullet points of things we were going to cover in the film. And all I can say is he is either instinctively just a brilliant performer, or he works really hard, and he went and did some homework, because I barely had to open my mouth during the Ian McKellen interview. He would just, again, reel off story after story directly, you know, aimed at the important points that we had to make in our film, and did just a wonderful job delivering those and making them happen.
Well, I envy you, because I just looked
those
at him, just incredible. What conventional, this is just a general question for you. What conventional wisdom do you disagree with?
Sort of theater conventional wisdom or filmmaking conventional wisdom?
Either or. Whatever you want to cover.
Either or, okay. Let me think. I mean, I guess the conventional wisdom of Broadway, that a lot of people say you need a star to make a great Broadway success. And I think, again, if you look at the through the years, the big shows that changed Broadway, many of them didn't have a star, but created stars.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's special about Broadway. It's a place where stars are created. And people who want to go see somebody they know from television, they're better off going and taking a chance to see something, even if they don't know everybody in the cast, because they're going to be surprised and they're going to meet the new sensation. You know, and that was true of a number of the people that we filmed, that, you know, someone took a chance on them, and boy, did they grab that chance, and now they're stars.
That's great. Thank you for saying that. That's wonderful. What was the hardest apology that you have ever delivered in your career?
I'm sorry, Richard, you broke up as you were asking that question. Can you ask again?
Yes. What was the hardest apology that you have ever delivered in your career?
Hardest apology. Let me think about that. Ask the next question. We'll come back to that one. Okay. I'll try to think of something true and
what was your biggest find working on this film?
The biggest what?
Find. F-I-N-D.
Sorry, Richard, you're really breaking up now. There's something.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on. The planets are going crazy. What was your biggest find working on this film?
Oh, there were many pieces of archival footage that we were desperately hunting for, that we thought, you know, will we get this? Will we be able to track that down? You know, I think the first time I saw the footage from the White House of Lin Manuel Miranda performing the first song from that turned into Hamilton, which I guess had been on the internet and lots of people had seen it when it first came out, but somehow I'd missed it. And it was such a beautiful moment and captures to me all of the excitement and the energy that made that the world-shaking success that it was. That was a real super find. But then other little things, just, you know, I was desperate to find a moment of Christine Baranski. Christine Baranski, when we found an old clip that we, you know, had to struggle to find a clip of her from John Guare's House of Blue Leaves. That was one of her early Broadway successes. And James Corden, who appears in the film, just knocked me out when I saw him in One Man, Two Governors, which I guess was also knocked out the head of his television network, who saw him on Broadway and so hired him to be his talk show host because he was so funny and so charming in that production. But when we found there was video of that put James Corden on Broadway with some of these other stars, that was a special moment too, because he's terrific in the film and I wanted to connect him back to Broadway.
That's wonderful. That's great. What is your biggest self-doubt?
I'm sorry, say again?
What is your biggest self-doubt?
Richard, your audio is just completely doing. What can we do?
I don't know. What is your biggest?
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay. What is your biggest self-doubt?
Biggest self-doubt?
Yes.
Okay. I guess when I go into an interview, you know, I ask, you know, am I going to be able to get something out of this person which will really make a connection with them, where they'll really, you know, deliver the best of themselves?
Mm-hmm.
You know, can I be that kind of catalyst to help them get going and really do a fabulous interview? That's sort of the challenge every time, anyway.
No, that's interesting. Great.
And going back to your earlier question about the toughest apology, well, no, that I can't tell that story. Well, I'll keep thinking.
You'll tell me off the record sometime. Where in the world, with all of the work that you've done, have you ever felt the safest?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Where in the world have you ever felt the safest?
Where in the world have I felt the safest?
Yes.
I think just when I'm working and I'm, I feel like I'm in the moment and really, supported by the people that I'm making a film with, and we're together and everything is clicking and it's feeling very, like the machine is rolling. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. It's a safe feeling. You feel you're in good hands when you're with great collaborators. And I've been very, very fortunate with the people that I've worked with, the cameramen, the editors, the sound recordists, the producers. And so I'm lucky I'm in a collaborative art because they all carry me.
Thank you. That's great. What's the best telephone call that you have ever made or received?
Richard, I'm sorry, I lost that one too.
No.
You're breaking up.
What is the best telephone call that you've ever made or received?
Oh, that's a good one. I wish I'd known some of these ahead of time and I could come up with good answers. I remember getting a phone call when I was a young director inviting me to come make a movie in Russia. And I think that was maybe one of the most exciting moments in my life. I felt like, oh my gosh, this is something out of the extraordinary where an amazing door is opening and I want to be able to go on this adventure.
Wow, that's great. What do you think was the biggest regret of your career so far? Or do you have any regrets?
I'm sure I do, but I think I'm lucky in that I kind of can forget about them and move on. Because I think if you get hung up on your regrets, it's hard to move forward. You've got to just set your goal for the next thing and move on.
Great. I've got one last question. And what was the largest debt that you have ever run up in your career?
The largest debt. I think as a filmmaker, I try not to go into debt. I try not to go over budget. I try not to get into trouble. So I guess my biggest debt are to, the filmmakers and the other artists who've inspired me, that get me excited, make me want to go out and keep making films and try to make a better film, because that's what gets me going and keeps me going.
That's
the
great.
Biggest debt.
Don't go anywhere for a minute. I just want to say to everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much for joining us today on Broadway. When can people see this film? First of all, Oren.
They can see it now. It's playing on Apple TV, on iTunes. You can rent it. It's also on other download services like that, pay-per-view services. And we are, at the moment, the distributor is negotiating a streaming deal where it will be on some other streamers that if you're, have a subscription, you can watch it there. But for the moment, it's rentable. I think it's like $4 on a lot of these different platforms. But the one I know is the easiest is Apple Plus, what used to be Apple TV or iTunes.
Yes, it's incredible. Everyone watch it. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. If this is your first time here at Richard Skipper Celebrates, I hope that it will not be your last time. My show is all about celebrating artists and their body of worth. Right here on Richard Skipper Celebrates, there's a button that says join in the celebration. Please click on that button. Leave a comment. Share this with your friends. Check out the others that I've celebrated here and keep coming back. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, and the 9th name that pops up, reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, a phone call. And let that person know what they mean to you. As my dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And I always say, if you're going to go out in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. Oren, I'm going to leave the screen and I'm going to give you the final word. Anything you want to say about anything that we talked about today that you want to build upon? anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to anyone who's watching right now. I thank you for being here. I hope that you'll come back sometime. Thank you for the gifts that you've given to the world and that you will continue to give. Happy New Year. And I wish you a very successful New Year for both you and your family. And thanks for being here today. Don't worry about how to end the show.
Richard, thank you so much. It's been...
When you say goodbye, I will
Thank
end the
you so
show.
much.
Thank you.
Richard, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and your questions have been fabulous. I think the last thing I would like to leave your audience with is just the encouragement to go out and see a play whenever you get an opportunity. Go see a live performance. We'll get through COVID, and theater will be coming back where you are. Come see a Broadway show when you can, but enjoy the theater, and maybe I'll see you there. Take care. Looking for you on Broadway. Take care. And good night, Richard. Thank you.